Mr. President, Mr. Ayau, students and faculty of UFM, it is an honor beyond description for me to be here. I have been an admirer of your institution for as long as I can remember. And I knew Muso Ayau as a fellow member of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation for Economic Education. And as I was speaking to a group of people before this lecture this morning, I really think it's fair to say that Muso was every Fee board member's favorite Fee board member. He was the one we always wanted to spend time with, and you never saw him alone. Everybody was crowding around him to seek his wisdom. And what a remarkable tribute to his achievements to have an institution as we have here at UFM, soon to celebrate the centennial of Muso Ayau's birth later this year. So it's a great honor to be here, and I thank you in advance for listening to what I have to say. Our subject is liberty and character. This is one of the few audiences I will have spoken to that doesn't probably need much of a lecture on liberty, because I know that is central to the message of UFM. I think everybody here gets pretty well filled with the arguments on behalf of human liberty while you're here. So suffice it to say that I'll spend more time on the second part of the speech title, on character, than I will on the first part. But that's not to say that liberty isn't important. In fact, I want to make sure I make this plain at the outset that without life, or without liberty, I should say, without liberty, life would be unthinkable. That's how important liberty is. If you can try to imagine for a moment, what would it be like to live in a place where you couldn't make decisions, big or small, about your life without the approval or at the direction of those with political power? That, to me, is unthinkable. You cannot survive, you cannot flourish in a society where at every turn you must follow the orders, the dictates, the mandates of the guys holding the guns. So liberty is pretty important stuff. And sometimes when we try to convince others of the virtue of liberty, we offer the following arguments. We say, well, you should be for liberty because it produces abundance. And there's no question, if you look around the world, and this is documented every year in multiple indexes in which the degree of economic freedom in the countries of the world is assessed, given a score, and then you can easily determine what the standards of living of those countries are at the same time. And those indexes show every single year that the countries that enjoy the greatest economic liberty, or liberty more broadly, are also the most prosperous. They solve more problems. They feed and clothe and house more people. They tend to be among the most charitable people in the world. They don't just give charity lip service and say, I'm for it, I'm compassionate, trust me. They actually are the big givers in the world. So there's no connection or no disputing the connection between liberty and abundance. I think that's quite obvious. But if that's your only argument, if you try to convince others they should be for liberty solely from this abundance perspective, you may make some converts, but you may quickly lose them when others come along with a different message and say, well, material goods aren't everything, and yeah, maybe capitalism or free markets produce more stuff, but then it's unfair the way it's distributed. So we have to have government step in and change all that. It's not sufficient to simply argue for liberty on an abundance perspective. You have to fall back to some other arguments that will help reinforce your case. Another one is, I think this is very powerful, to point out to people that individuals are, every one of them, incredibly unique. Now think of this. This is more profound than you might imagine. We have 8 billion people on the planet right now. Who knows how many more there have been who lived on this planet in the past. Whatever that total number is, there's no reason to believe that any two people who have ever lived have been precisely identical. Every single human being has been a unique combination of endless characteristics, endless attributes and dreams, and you name it. Well, that's quite a remarkable observation. You can't say that necessarily about the animal world or the plant world, but it is a very special observation about human beings. And it really is an argument for liberty, because if each of us is unique, well, then it follows that you have to have a considerable degree of liberty over what you do, where you live, who you associate with, what you buy, what you build, where you go. You have to have considerable degree of choice over those things, or you're not living your life. If you live in a country where somebody in political power tells you at every turn what to do, what to think, and so forth, you're not really living your life, are you? Somebody else is living their life through you. And if that's the case, we should, as thinking individuals, we should be able to ask, why do you get to do that? Why can't I do that? Why can't I turn around and tell you what to do? So, in order to be who you are, you have to enjoy considerable freedom. That's how we find out who you are, by your choices, not by what somebody else told you to do. You don't make a person religious by taking him to church at gunpoint. So what goes on up here has to have considerable choice in order for us to find out who you are, in order for you to be who you are. That's a powerful argument for liberty, but I want to suggest to you today that maybe there's one argument, could be more powerful than all the others, that we underestimate, that we don't use often enough. And that is the connection between liberty and character. I would go so far to say, and I'll try to justify this in the remainder of my remarks, that liberty and character are two sides of the same coin. Two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. If you don't have liberty, how will we ever know if you're a person of character? If your decisions, your choices are really not yours, how can we assess your character? And if you don't have character, how can you expect to have liberty? Take that to a larger perspective, say all of society. Have you ever heard of a society in which the people, to a great extent or in great numbers, lacked strong personal character traits and kept their liberties? I don't know of any. I think it's a cardinal rule in the study of history that a country of people who lose their character will sooner or later lose their liberty. Now, to fully explain that, I need to talk about the individual traits of character that are I think, most important. You know, we use that term character in multiple ways, don't we? I think all over the world, people have heard others speak of another person in this terminology. Oh, he's a character. All right, how many have heard someone say that? Or she's a character. And we usually mean that with a smile, that there's something eccentric or different, unusual, mostly appealing about the other person. There's something unique about them that makes people smile. What a character, great sense of humor or whatever. But you know, you can be a character and not necessarily have very much character. I mean character for the purposes of this talk in a different way. I mean that cluster of personal traits that define you as a person. That cluster of personal characteristics that make you up. That sooner or later, at least as an adult, if not before, really decide who you are and probably also how far you're going to go. So let me give you a few of those traits. This is not in any order of importance, but I think all of them are critically important. What are the traits of solid character necessary for your personal success and perhaps then the success of a nation as a whole. Those are the ones I want to talk about. First one I'll cite is honesty. Honesty. Can you imagine a society of dishonest people being also a society of free people? I don't think that's likely. Imagine a society where truth is not important to people, where people don't value truth in and of itself, where they think that, prevaricating or lying, for the slightest of reasons is perfectly all right, especially if it gives me some short-term advantage. You couldn't make a contract with anybody and shake their hand and walk away thinking you've got a deal, because you'd never know. Maybe they'll break it at the moment they think it would advantage them. How could you conduct your relationships with other people if you couldn't trust them, if they didn't believe in truth, if they lied and broke their word for the simplest of reasons? I think any society that forgets a commitment to truth is a society that will sooner or later descend into chaos. And you know historically what happens when a society descends into chaos for any reason. The strong man comes in at some point, knocks heads together, brings order out of the chaos, and there go your liberties. So honesty is important. I want to tell you a story from personal experience about perhaps the most honest person I have ever met. In 1989, I visited Cambodia in Southeast Asia. Before I went there, the local newspaper in Michigan where I was living ran some stories. A local professor going to Cambodia looking for donations of medical supplies. The local hospitals contributed medicines that I was able to take with me, because Cambodia, I knew, was in very bad shape. It had endured 3.5 years of terror under the Khmer Rouge communists, who killed off about 2 million out of a population of 8 million. Then they were invaded by the neighboring Vietnamese, who only about the time I went were finally withdrawing from Cambodia. So I expected to see the Stone Age, and in some ways I did. But when a local woman saw the story in the paper that I was going to Cambodia, she called me and she said, "Mr. Reed, our church took care of several Cambodian families, refugees, a few years ago when they got out of Cambodia and made their way to the United States. And now they're a bit scattered in other parts of America, but we stay in touch. But every time they send a letter to their loved ones back in Cambodia, they have trouble getting that letter to the intended recipients, especially if the letters have money in them. They never see it. So those Cambodian families are asking me if they gave you envelopes with letters and money in them, will you take them with you and try to find their families and present them personally with the letters? And I said, I'll do my best. 3 of the 4 families were in the capital of Phnom Penh, and they were not difficult to find. And so we did that and filmed the presentation of the envelopes. They were thrilled. The 4th family was quite a distance away in a town called Battambang. And I was told, if you can't get there during your visit, don't come back with any money. Just open that envelope and at least give the money to anybody you think really needs it. Don't bring it back. So the night before we were to depart, when I realized I wasn't going to get to Battambang to see that 4th family, I faced a decision. How am I going to get this money to somebody? Who should I give it to? Well, I had a very good feeling about a gentleman who I'm sure was desperately poor, who had given me some rides around town in his rickshaw. And I thought, he spoke just enough English we could have broken conversations. And he seemed like a good man to me. So before I left, I met up with him and I said, here's an envelope with a letter and $200 in it. Will you please see what you can do to get it to Battambang? And if you can keep $50 of the $200. Well, that was like half a year's salary to the average Cambodian in 1989. So then I left the country. Now, what would you assume likely happened to that last letter and the $200? Most people wouldn't have much confidence that it got to its intended recipients, right? It would be natural to assume that. Several months later, that lady in my town who had first called and asked me about taking these letters, she called all excited. She said, "Larry, I just got a letter from the family now living in Minnesota whose relatives you couldn't get to, but gave the envelope and the money to someone to take it to them. And I have to read you this particular paragraph in the family's letter. And in that paragraph it said, 'Thank you for the $200. Now, what did that mean? That meant that that desperately poor man not only made the effort to get to Battambang, apparently even paid for probably a train ticket himself, desperately poor though he was. And when he got there, he didn't keep the $50 that I told him he could for his trouble. He gave it all to the family for whom it was intended. What a world it would be if everyone conducted their lives in such a fashion. I've often thought, gee, if I was ever in a situation where my life depended on that man, I would trust him without a moment's hesitation. Such honesty. Maybe there's a lot more going on there too besides just honesty, but I think he was an incredibly honest man. Well, honesty is critically important to your success and to the success of a country. And honest people have a chance to be free. Dishonest people will not likely be free for long. But there are other character traits that I'd like to cite. One is intellectual humility. I know that's a mouthful, but how many of you here have read the fee essay from our founder, Leonard Read, called I, Pencil? Okay, yeah, lots of you know that essay. It's written as if a pencil is speaking about how it comes into being, where the wood comes from, where the graphite comes from, and so forth. And one of the remarkable lessons of that story is that nobody knows how to make a pencil. If somebody told you you could not rely upon anyone else's knowledge, you couldn't read a book about it, you couldn't visit a factory to see where they're made, just with the almost no knowledge whatever that you presently have about pencil making, make one yourself. I don't think anybody could do it. You'd have to rely upon somebody else's science, somebody else's work. Think of all the skills that come into play from people from all over the world just to make a single pencil. You'd have to do it yourself. You'd have to be a logger. You'd have to be a miner. And you'd have to grasp all the science and technology involved in just those disciplines as well as others. Well, if nobody knows how to make a pencil by himself, totally, what does that say about the ability of anybody or any group of people to plan an entire economy? We used to debate that. Today, I think we've made some progress in that we can point out to people the very notion that a handful of people can plan the lives and economy of lots of other people is absurd. It's preposterous. It's hardly debatable. Well, this is important because it tends to make a person humble when you realize how little you know. Doesn't matter how many PhDs you have after your name. There is an infinite amount of knowledge out there that you don't know, and that will be just as true on your last day on earth as it was on your first day. An infinite amount of knowledge out there that you don't know. When you realize that, most people then become a bit more focused on improving themselves. Just the opposite of a humble people would be an arrogant, condescending people. Do you like to go to lunch with somebody who thinks he's better than you in everything and is proud to tell you so? I don't think so. That gets old pretty quick. A humble person is one who says, wow, I thought I knew a lot, but there's an awful lot more that I don't know. Maybe I should improve my understanding of the way the world works. Maybe I need to read a lot more. Maybe I should be a student all my life, not just the time I attended a university. I think it's important for people to be humble because then they're less likely to meddle in the lives of other people. I like to tell American audiences, or at least ask this question. I say, after explaining this, I ask them, what do you think is the most unhumble city in America? Any guesses? New York? That's a good one. Washington. Yeah, I think Washington is. It's full of people running around with briefcases with plans for everybody else's lives. I think Washington needs to understand that lesson from a lowly, humble pencil, that none of them know how to even make one of those, let alone plan the lives of several 100 million people. So intellectual humility, I think, is a strong character trait. It makes you more interested in searching and exploring and learning than an arrogant or condescending know-it-all attitude ever does. Responsibility, another very important character trait. Can you imagine living in a society of mostly irresponsible people? What would that look like? If a people are irresponsible, they would be always blaming everybody else for their own mistakes. They would be a society of people saying, it's your fault, not mine, even if it was mine. It's yours. You owe me something. I'm entitled. Don't ask me to learn from my mistakes. I'm moving on and probably going to make a lot more. A responsible person is one who steps up and doesn't try to run from the mistakes he makes. He acknowledges them, he doesn't blame them on others, and he learns from them, so he makes fewer mistakes in the future. An irresponsible people, I don't think, has any chance to be a free people. Another character trait is courage. We live in a dangerous world, don't we? That's always been the case. There are always people in our midst or elsewhere who would be happy to take away your rights, your freedoms, your property, even your life, if they thought they could do it, profit from it, and get away with it. That suggests that if we really want to live in liberty, we have to put a high priority on being courageous enough to speak truth to power, standing up and sometimes even putting our lives on the line, if required, in order to preserve our liberties. I don't think a timid people will long be a free people, not in a dangerous world. Courage is important. And I don't simply mean courage on the battlefield. I mean courage in all walks of life. Every day we make decisions, big and small, that require some degree of courage, right down to how you raise your children, how you deal with others who may be mistreating you. Courage is important. Speak truth to power. Thank God we've had people in history who have put everything on the line courageously on behalf of not just their own freedom, but the freedom of others as well. Another attribute is gratitude. Gratitude. Having a grateful spirit. A few years ago, a bioethicist named Emmons wrote a book in which he summarized the findings of his team of bioethicists who spent years studying this character trait of gratitude. They wanted to know, does having a grateful spirit make any difference in life? And they came to the startling conclusion that having a grateful spirit, expressing gratitude, and doing so naturally can add as much as 7 years to your life. People who are quick to say thank you, to express appreciation, tend to be a happier people. And they make other people happier just by expressing gratitude to them. What is gratitude? It's nothing more than the recognition that all the good things that may have happened to you in your life are not entirely of your own doing. It's not all because of you that good things happen to you. Good things happen to you because of something your parents said or did, something a friend said or did. Good things happen to you because we have entrepreneurs in free society who spend a lot of time and take risks to invent, create, to build, to employ, to solve problems. I think one of the most ungrateful people in all of history was probably Karl Marx. Can you imagine, with what you know of the father of communist theory, can you imagine Karl Marx ever walking into a store, say a hardware store, and walking up to the owner and saying, "Thank you so much for building this enterprise and making all these risky investments and hiring these people and making sure things that I want are on the shelf when I need them. Thank you for that. I know it couldn't have been easy. You put in a lot of hours, I'll bet." You can't imagine Karl Marx ever saying that, can you? Because he was by his very nature an angry person, always mad at the world, and advocating violence to fix it. I don't think he had a grateful spirit, and I don't think he lived a happy life. So expressing gratitude, it's one of the cheapest, least expensive ways to improve not only your life, but the lives of others you come into contact with. It's hard to say thank you without a smile, isn't it? It's hard to accept a thank you without smiling back, yet it doesn't cost a thing. Another character trait, the last one that I'll cite before giving you an example or two, is optimism. Optimism. I talk to a lot of audiences that are full of pessimism, just the opposite. They think, oh, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Oh, we lost an election. We lost the debate in the Congress or whatever. Things aren't going the way they should. I feel terrible about what's to come. How many have ever run into a pessimistic person? Yeah, they're everywhere, right? Well, I want to tell you that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy to be a pessimist. To think that woe is us, the future's dark. That means you've given up on it even before it's happened. What's the point of rendering such a terrible judgment on things that haven't occurred yet, over which you still have the opportunity to have some influence? Why give up? If you take on a pessimistic attitude, two bad things begin to happen. One, you stop working for what you know to be right. If you've already given up, if you think, well, we're going to lose, why put forth any extra efforts on its behalf? What's the point? But of course, you don't know the future, and you can still influence it. That's one bad thing that happens with a pessimistic nature. And the second thing that happens is you stop being influential. Other people won't rush to you to say, tell me what your message is. How can I help? Tell me more. I'm excited about what you have to say. If they get the suggestion or the hint at all that you think all is lost, why should they invest in any time listening to what you have to say? So I think we need to go forward as advocates of liberty and make the case that liberty will win the future. And if we really want to make sure that happens, we have to get involved. We have to sometimes put everything on the line on its behalf. But we're not going to give up before the fight even is over. I have to tell you that I don't know where it comes from, but I have noted, and other people who've known me all my life have said, Larry, you're the most optimistic person I've ever run into. Even as a kid, I used to have my parents say, you're the one that always sees the glass half full. Even when something bad happens, you're the one that starts thinking, well, how can we turn that to good advantage? Or maybe that's not so bad after all. If we did this, we could undo the damage. I don't know why, that comes naturally to me. And it really came home to me in February, so this would be an anniversary year of this, 45 years ago, this month. I was driving to work at the university where I taught on a very icy morning in Michigan at about 7:30 in the morning. And as I was headed to the campus, maybe a mile away from it, there was another car coming toward me. He had his left turn signal on as if he wanted to make a left turn, but he was waiting for me to come through so he could make his turn afterwards. But at the last second, he apparently decided he could turn. He had enough time, he could just turn in front of me. Well, I slammed on the brakes and lost control of the car, and it rolled and ended up in a shallow ravine on one side of the road, upside down. I remember how I felt and what went through my mind as that happened. Most people would, I think, be terrified, right? Oh, I'm going to die. But as the car was rolling, what I remember feeling serenely calm about it, like no big deal. And what popped into my head was, I'm going to get a new car out of this. And I did. That one was total. So that taught me, gee, there's something, yeah, I guess I am an optimist. But I think it serves us to have an optimistic outlook on the future, because then you don't give up. Well, have you ever met anybody who possessed a few, maybe all of those traits and some other good ones on top of it? Well, I have. And I want to tell you a story about this person. Robert and I briefly were talking about him before the talk this morning. He was the oldest person, man or woman, that I ever knew. He died in 2015 at the age of 106 and 2 months. His name was Nicholas Winton. He was known for decades as Britain's Schindler. And by that it was meant that he did a wonderful thing. He saved almost 700 Jewish children from the Nazis in 1939. Incredibly remarkable story. I feel so privileged that I happened to get to know him in the last 15 years of his life. I took students over to London for history tours. He lived just outside of London. And I always told them, watch this documentary, this film about Nicky Winton before we go. And then we're going to go to his home. We'll have lunch with him, and you can ask him questions. And think back to what it must have been like in 1938. From your history, you may recall that was the last full year of peace before the outbreak of the Second World War. But it was a year full of ominous events. In March of 1938, Adolf Hitler grabbed Austria. And then he started making noises about wanting a big part of Czechoslovakia, called the Sudetenland. And that prompted a big conference, famous conference in Munich, Germany in September of 1938, where Britain and France and Italy and Germany all sat down at a table. How do we solve this crisis over Czechoslovakia so that the world doesn't go to war? We know that conference most famously for a single word, appeasement, because the British and the French basically said to Hitler, well, go ahead, you can take that part of Czechoslovakia, but as long as you don't go any further, we won't go to war over that. They sold out Czechoslovakia at the bargaining table. And Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, flew home to Britain and waved that piece of paper and said, we have peace in our time. Didn't even last a year. But much of the world in the fall of 1938 thought, we dodged a bullet. It looked like we might go to war, and now we have a conference that settled the issue. Now we can go about our business. But Nicky Winton, who was a young stockbroker in London at the time, he didn't think this was going to blow over. He knew that Europe was in danger, that it was only a matter of time before Hitler took his next step. But he nonetheless planned to go to Switzerland for a Christmas vacation in December of 1938. Before he left London for Switzerland, he was contacted by a good friend who worked in the British Embassy in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And that friend said, Nicky, don't go to Switzerland. Come here instead. You've got to see what I want to show you. And Nicky said, all right, I'll make a side trip to Prague, and then I'll go to Switzerland. He got to Prague, and what his friend wanted him to see were the refugee camps, full of thousands of mostly Jewish families, many of whom had fled Germany itself or the part of Czechoslovakia that Hitler had just taken over. Some came from Poland, lots of different places, but they knew they were in danger. But they also knew that the world didn't recognize that. The world was saying, well, you're not in any danger. We signed an agreement. What's your trouble? No, we're not going to let you come here. You stay where you are. You're not in any danger. Nicky took a tour of these refugee camps, and guess what he found? Families, desperate refugee families, at the onset of winter in these makeshift camps, freezing, coming up to him, sometimes with babies in their arms, saying, "Sir, please take our children. We can't get out, but will you please take our children?" You have to be awfully desperate as a parent to approach a perfect stranger and say, "Take my children. Just get them out of harm's way. I can't get out, but at least maybe you can help get my kids out." That's the situation that he found. Now, he could, if he was not a person of solid character, he could have walked away. He could have said, "Oh, I feel for you, so sorry about this situation. I don't know what I could possibly do. I'm only one person. I'm supposed to be on vacation. Good luck." Maybe a lot of people would have done that. But Nicky went and dropped everything. He said, I've got to make an effort to do something on behalf of these endangered people. He wrote letters and telegrams to governments all over the world saying, if I can get the children out, will you at least allow them to enter your country? How many countries do you think responded positively of the dozens and dozens of requests that he sent? Only two: his own Britain and Sweden. And even his own country said, we think this is going to blow over. We don't want to get stuck with the costs of sending these children back. So for every child you bring in, you not only have to find a foster family who will take them into their homes, you have to put on deposit with the Home Office the equivalent in today's money of about $3,000. So he had to scramble to raise money. He knew the clock was ticking, that war could break out at any time. In the end, he arranged for 9 different rail transports out of Prague of hundreds and hundreds of children that he found foster families for, mostly in Britain. And the first 8 of those transports through August of 1939 carried 669 children, some of them as young as babies in arms. The only reason he couldn't talk about what happened to the 9th transport was the outbreak of the war. He had the largest of his transports, 250 children, foster parents already having spoken for them in Britain. He had them at Prague Station, September 1, 1939, the day that the Second World War broke out. The Nazis ordered the trains to be emptied, stopped all transports, took those children off the trains. Not a single one of those children survived. He couldn't talk about this. He joined the RAF and flew for 6 years on behalf of his country. And the children who did get out, they grew up in foster homes. Almost none of them ever saw their parents again. And here's a guy who, he didn't do what he did. He didn't save all those lives for either fame or fortune. He didn't even talk about it. He could have written a book, made a lot of money. We would have been grateful to have him tell the world about what he did, but it just kind of quietly died. And the children grew up and he never said a word for 50 years until his wife was going through the attic and she found lots of paperwork and she said, "What's all this stuff?" He married her after the war, so she never knew about this pre-war thing that he engaged in. He finally told her, and the story got out, all the documentation got out. Nicky Winton was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for what he did. Every time we visited him, and the students I took with me would ask him, tell us more. How did you do this? How did you dodge the Germans? They would say things like, "Oh, Mr. Winton, you're such a humble person. You're such a hero." And he would quickly say, no, don't call me a hero. I don't need that. I just did what I could. Such humility. Nicky Winton saved all those lives. If you add up all the lives of the children he saved and their children, that number is now more than 7,000 people alive or were alive because of the efforts of this one man. So never say that one person can't make a difference. If you have courage, optimism, if you believe in the liberty of others, not just that of yourself, and if you at the same time are humble enough to learn, you can make a difference in the world. You can be the kind of person that your children and their children will talk about for generations to come. Liberty and character, two sides of the same coin. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.